Hey, this is going to be a rough one.
What happened? What happened?
Well, I guess we'll get to that. Maybe we won't do an episode on like, you know what, I'm out of here. We're not talking about it. All right, fine. We'll stick around. We're going to talk about this. Welcome all into the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. And well, Santa Clara beat St. Mary's on Saturday night. And this was a really, really nice performance from Santa Clara. It was an awful performance from St. Mary's. Even with the Vandy game existing, this might be St. Mary's worst outing of the season. We'll get to that in just a bit. Obviously, we're going to start there. We'll talk about Gonzaga and how it seems like no Huff, no Ike, no problem against Seattle U. We'll talk a little bit about USF and what happened there on Saturday night on Sunday night, I should say, between they and Washington State and what happened at the very end of that game. We'll start to get into the games that are coming up this week. Of course, we will have another live edition of the podcast on Saturday to preview those games. So all of that, we'll get to that. Before we get started, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening to the podcast. And so now we will get into the game on Saturday, which I'm going to step aside to take a moment because I have a hard time talking about this game after watching that game. This was ugly from the St. Mary's side. But from the Santa Clara side, big win for the Broncos and puts them probably right back into the conversation for the NCAA tournament.
Gritty. That's what it was. It was gritty where it had to be, and beating St. Mary's requires an immense amount of physical and mental toughness, and Santa Clara reached into a gear where they hadn't found it in recent years. So much so that Christian Hammond drops 25 points, and I think more than anything showcased that his 3-level scoring ability come to fruition, because in certain respects, some guys will go at Harry Wessels, at Andrew McKeever. Christian Hammond's floater is such a game changer in that regard, where you don't have to go all the way to the basket. I think he was phenomenal throughout the game, really controlled for the most part. Alan Graves, that's a battle-tested man right there. 11 points, 8 rebounds against those guys. I mentioned I didn't know how it would shake out with the size difference, but Alan Graves continued his immense tenacity, immense amount of pride in the paint, and deserved every bit of the awards that they both ended up getting. Broncos swept WCC Player of the Week and Freshman of the Week awards with Christian Hammond and Alan Graves, respectively. And I think more than anything, they dished out what St. Mary's usually does to other teams. And that's not to say that St. Mary's wilted it in that respect whatsoever. They just couldn't hit shots. But just in terms of the physicality and the toughness that St. Mary's dishes on a game-in, game-out basis, Santa Clara threw right back at them and then some.
I mean, you look at the numbers of this game, and Ken, we talked about on Saturday morning about the big runs that St. Mary's has put on Santa Clara over the years. St. Mary's had 9 points at the 10-minute mark of the first half. St. Mary's scored 1 point through the first 9 minutes of the second half. This was doing to St. Mary's what St. Mary's has done to everybody else. And a lot of that, I will say, it's like there was some good defense played by Santa Clara, but St. Mary's did miss a lot of open shots we are used to seeing them make. So there's a combination of the two. But at a certain point, you start to look at like that this St. Mary's team didn't just shoot poorly. They shot awful the other night. They shot 32% from the field for the game. They were 4 for 22 from 3, 18%. You look at that some of the guys are used to kind of seeing you can rely upon. Josh Dent, 3 for 13. He had 4 turnovers. Dylan Shaw, 2 for 9. Mikey Lewis, 1 for 11. And the one that's almost like the most shocking to me is Palis Morauskas. He played 36 minutes in this game. He had 12 points, 10 rebounds. he took all of 7 field goal attempts, and he only got to the line 4 times. Like, this was it felt like a very uncharacteristic outing. He was bothered as well. Like, he had 4 turnovers in this game, so it wasn't like it was don't get it to Paulus Morauskas. Is that some of the times when he got it, like, he was rushed, he got into some trouble. He had the ball taken away from him a few times, and this was a game where it felt like Santa Clara was ready, and St. Mary's, not that they walked into this game, but it was clear from the get-go, from the jump, of who really was going to be the aggressor all night long.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from with that. And I think this is just more of a footnote as compared to a general theme of the game. But St. Mary's, you walk into the game against Santa Clara, they're number 1 in the country in free throw shooting percentage, and then they go 14-22. So, like, that's like, another one of those things where you talk about the shooting. Mikey Lewis, that 1 of 11, he couldn't build on what he did against USF. I was curious. I was expecting a little bit more force from the centers in Harry Wessels and Andrew McKeever, just in terms of the board dominance. And that's not to say that Santa Clara doesn't have the size, but just in terms of the mass and the clear outs, I think the Broncos did a solid job in terms of gang rebounding more than anything, because it takes everybody to corral against St. Mary's. I mean, Christian Hammond had 5 rebounds, Mahi 6 rebounds, Alan Graves, we mentioned 8. A lot of guys getting 3+ rebounds. It takes a village to get it done. And I thought the Broncos did that, and I thought they really minimized the impact of what the centers could do on a possession-by-possession basis. I was expecting a very close, if not more than double-double for Andrew McKeever, and while he got close, I was just expecting that little bit more. I thought Santa Clara did a good job for the most part corralling the big fellas.
I mean, for Andrew McKeever, like, part of it was the foul trouble. Like, he was in foul trouble for a good chunk of that game. He still played 25 minutes, but they did a good job of kind of neutralizing his ability. Because one of the things that we have started to see is that he's not as good as you start to take him out to the perimeter, which the way Santa Clara's bigs typically are when Buki Boy is not in. It's like, these are 5s that are going to be able to stretch the floor. And if you're now moving an Andrew McKeever out to the perimeter, it does open up the lane a little bit more. And Alan Graves, as the example, he's someone who can actually put it on the floor. So you have to respect, but you also have to be able to respect his 3-point shot. He did make that apparent in that game. And so, like, the fact that he was able to kind of show that inside out game, we've seen it all year long from him. Santa Clara did a lot of things really well, and St. Mary's, and like this is, we've touched on it a little bit. When you look at the tough games that they have had all year long, like, this is their 3 losses this season: Vandy, Boise State, Santa Clara. And while, at least in the Boise and Santa Clara game, they were still in both of these games, what really, like, at least in 2 of them, what's failed them has been the offense. Like, they looked the shell of themselves again at Boise State. They looked the shell of themselves at Santa Clara. They have not, I said at Boise State, technically neutral site game, but still, like, up in Idaho, like, this St. Mary's team is still, I think, finding itself on the consistent front offensively. I mean, now it's funny because we talked about it the other day about how the St. Mary's offense has been what's been carrying them to this point. And this was a little bit more kind of ugly, gutted out, like, St. Mary's of the last few years, where it's the defense that has actually been kind of what's kept them in this game. Again, like, they only let Santa Clara score 62 points. So it's not like Santa Clara had a normal Santa Clara game either. Both these teams had to do something they were unaccustomed to doing this year, and Santa Clara just was able to get just a few more buckets and hold on to this one.
Yeah, Santa Clara did whatever it took, and so much so that you're starting to see the bracketologists are starting to put things together. The Athletic put something together. Andy Katz, Joe Lenardi putting things together. Santa Clara is on first 4 out territory. Like that, this is something where you have not seen that in I don't know how long, ever since before I even committed there to go to college. I think you would see something like that. We got to date back to maybe the Steve Nash years to get that type of bracketology approach. And I think more than anything going forward, it's okay. Santa Clara, you're in position. Yes, the Loyola Chicago game happened, but like now you've worked. You didn't work your way out of it, but you're trying to stem the tide, and you got to keep going. The message for them is simple: 1-0 every day. It's not, you can't look ahead to USF next Wednesday. The full focus has to be on San Diego, because it's never been about the good wins. It's always been about the bad losses. And if Santa Clara can avoid the losses in WCC that they are not expected to take, and then even maybe potentially steal one against Gonzaga or the return trip to St. Mary's, then you've made yourself in business. And then on the other side, I think this puts St. Mary's in a little bit of, I don't know what I want to use the correct phrasing here because it's not a state of peril, but I will say it does force them to be on their P's and Q's because the quad one wins are not there. And while St. Mary's doesn't have a bad loss, so to speak, they don't necessarily have a plethora of opportunities to pad their resume. And so I think what it does do is it adds a lot of seriousness to those games against USF, Gonzaga, the return trip against Santa Clara, and any of these other meticulous WCC games. Like the margin for error for St. Mary's, I think more than anything is what has decreased. And I think that's something I really want to see how they operate going forward.
And that margin for error was something, obviously, like I was harping on in the preseason. When I took a look at the schedules, like the number of opportunities for them to get good wins was just not there. And when I say good wins, the quad one and quad twos, that's what I'm thinking about. Because, yeah, they have a lot of good wins against mid-major squads that are going to either win their conference or be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in their leagues. And those are still quality wins when you think about what those teams are going to be in March. May not necessarily be the sexy win or whatever else now, but those were probably going to age well. But at the same time, it's like you weren't going to have those quad one and quad two opportunities all that often. We saw them that they at least have had a few. Like you think about Virginia Tech, you think about what they had Boise, Santa Clara. You will see Gonzaga a couple times. You still see Santa Clara one more time. USF on the road is starting to climb back into that discussion as well. And we'll get to the Dons in a little bit. But St. Mary's has put themselves in a position where, at least to me, it feels more dangerous. Now, I did reach out just to kind of see our buddy Rocco Miller. I was curious. So I asked him the question of like, how safe is St. Mary's if they didn't have the quad one wins, if they somehow didn't beat Gonzaga, didn't beat Santa Clara, worst case scenario, what are they still safe? And he still thinks they're fine, that they are still okay because of all the other metrics that play in St. Mary's' favor. And the numbers do still like St. Mary's. They're still a top 35 team in the net. They still are doing really well across the board in all those metrics. Now, that kind of the same point of that means you will no longer have any room for error. You can't then fall to USF the second time around. You probably now need to beat Santa Clara the second time around. You can't, like the Gonzaga games, you don't maybe not need them. Like, I feel like you kind of need one of them. And especially if you can take advantage of no Braden Huff at the moment, that would be even better. And maybe this is kind of one of the challenges is that St. Mary's is maybe more built to beat a traditional Gonzaga team as opposed to the way Santa Clara is currently built. When you have a lot of kind of like stretch 4, stretch 5s, where that is just not St. Mary's forte. They are very traditional big man who's going to sit under the basket, and they don't really have those defenders who are going to be able to go inside and out with a lot of guys who Santa Clara, I think, is kind of unique, almost uniquely positioned to give St. Mary's trouble in that way. And clearly we saw that the other night.
Yeah, I mean, for St. Mary's, I think going forward, you don't need to change who you are more than anything. But what I will say is that you talk to Rocco Miller and what it means bracketology wise, and some fans may not want to hear this, but brand name and consistency does play a factor, whether people know it or not. It does play this like subliminal bias into this, and I think compared to other mid majors, St. Mary's, not that they should rely on it, so to speak, but it can matter when you get down into the dog days of March Madness bracketology, that St. Mary's on the bubble may get that benefit of the doubt just because of who they are and what they've accomplished on a year-over-year basis for the last decade plus.
And can't completely discount it. And of course, St. Mary's actually won games in the NCAA tournament. They've won at least their first round game 3 of the last 4 seasons. You can kind of see St. Mary's track record in game 1 of the NCAA tournament. Game 2, obviously far more sketchy, but game 1, they usually are able to take care of business on that front. But we're going to move on and head to the Pacific Northwest, because one of the big things that happened last week, in case you did miss it, Braden Huff what is now going to be out for 4 to 8 weeks with a knee injury. So he missed the game against Seattle U. He missed 2 games already, the one game against Washington State and then also the game against Seattle U on Saturday. And then on Saturday, Graham Ike also did not play. He is day-to-day with a foot injury, but on that night, no Huff, no Ike, no problem because the Zags still won 71-50, held Seattle U to a season low 50 points. They complete the season sweep of the Red Hawks, and this defense has continued to carry Gonzaga. The clear difference from a year ago, they were plus 20 on the glass. They were plus 16 in the points in the paint. It's a very different Gonzaga team without those two around. But, I mean, the one thing that was very clear is that they are still a very, very good defensive team without them, and probably are an even better defensive team without the two of them in the lineup.
So I'll start with something from the Seattle Youth side. And Red Hawks administrators, can we please invest in a Climate Pledge Arena worthy broadcast? Can we please do that? I think more than any, like I watched from the SWX side a little bit and what the Gonzaga local Spokane market got. And obviously they get Greg Heister, I believe it was Dan Dick out doing the game, and solid level production all around. But Seattle U wise, like CPA games require CPA level production, and we can't be having these technical difficulties. We can't have the announcers sounding like they're in a London, England telephone booth. Like we got to get this in gear, guys. Otherwise you're leveling some of the peers with some of the other WCC broadcasts, and that's not a moniker that you want to get right now. So that's one thing. Get off my soapbox there. The second thing is, with Gonzaga is they dictated the matchup more than anything. And yes, Seattle U had the size and was trying to get into it more than anything. But when you slide a guy like Tylen Grant Foster more on the interior, Jalen Worley basically playing the de facto 5, and as Brian Michelson said post game, like he will play 1 through 5, can't guard anybody. Anybody with hands can make things happen. And that's kind of what Gonzaga did. They ended up dictating the terms and forcing Seattle U to go small ball and basically putting that Red Hawks offense into strangulation and into submission. So I think that was really the big thing for the Zags. They dictated the terms on the defensive end of the floor, got out, ran on offense, and eventually got things going towards the very end. It did take a long time to do it. And Coach Michelson was very matter of fact of, it changes your offense more than your defense, and not having those two big post pillars to run through at all 3 levels of the floor does change things. And it took a long time for the Zags to get going, but eventually they did. And mainly towards the last 7 minutes or so, really got off and running for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it is the offense that's going to be the part that struggles without those two in the lineup. And a lot of that, we talked about how that was probably going to be thrown a lot more onto Tylen Grant Foster. But a lot of that's also going to be how the point guards play. And I think we've seen some growing pains from Mario Saint-Superi, which is to be expected coming over to the U.S., playing the American style, also still being as young as he is. Braden Smith kind of coming in. Also, there's one thing to be practicing and playing with the team when you're redshirting. It's completely different when you have to do it on the night in, night out basis. And those are two that are going to be more and more important the longer Braden Huff is out. And that's true of everybody else, because you think about how efficient Braden Huff is on a regular basis, game in, game out, arguably one of the top 10 offensive players in the country. When you think about just how effective he is inside the paint, their offense was always going to take a little bit of a step back. If Graham Ike is healthy, his foot's okay, it's not going to take a huge step back because we know how good Ike is going to be. And for the most part in WCC play, it's not going to impact this team all too much. What it could impact is when they do see St. Mary's in 2 weeks, when they do see Santa Clara in 3 weeks, because that is kind of at least the first marker of that 4-week mark. When Gonzaga sees Santa Clara, is Braden Huff going to be back for that game? And Thomas, it's if he's not there, that allows you at least to have a little bit more attention to be paid to Graham Ike. And Santa Clara is at least one of the few teams in the league who is equipped to be able to do that. And be able to try to at least give him more problems, because no Braden Huff does change the equation. Because we saw even some of the substitution patterns during the game on Saturday. even like we saw even like, I mean, Deanna got a few more minutes than we thought we were going to see. We got to see obviously more of Davis Fogel in the last couple of games. We're going to see more and more of them. Highland even got into the game towards the end of it's like they're without those two in the lineup, there is something to be said about the Zags are going to be digging deep to find somebody who can play the post. But I don't expect Graham Ike to really miss that much time. I think like he's going to be the one where it's like, yeah, he'll probably be back pretty quickly. And they're still going to need to find ways to supplement what Braden Huff was going to give you. But at the same time, they're going to be able to handle their business in conference play up until they see the likes of a St. Mary's or a Santa Clara.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that changes going forward is Braden Huff. His gravity really changes a whole bunch of things. And you mentioned the focus that people can turn towards Graham Ike, because I still think that's one thing. And another thing of actually stopping him is a whole nother discussion because of just how good Graham Ike is on a game in, game out basis. But I think more than anything, the spotlight, for at least for me, turns to Tyron Graham Foster. Like, this is someone who you brought in to go out and go perform at the highest level, given what he's been doing. And all right, let's go make something happen, Tyon. Like, it's obviously not under the circumstances you want it to be, but the spotlight's now on you to kind of give a little bit more offensively. And that's someone who I have my eyes turned towards to, okay, you have the ball's going to be in your hand a lot more. And I know the Mark Few offense is predicated on ball movement and sharing, but I want to see some times where Tyron Graham Foster just says, yeah, I'm going to go get the bucket for us because I know we absolutely need it, and I'm going to be the one to go get it.
Yeah, I mean, even I was starting to take a look at some of the other numbers from the Seattle U game just to see if there was any kind of significant difference. I mean, the offense did not shoot nearly as well as we're used to seeing them. The 46% shooting percentage for the game was one of the lower turnouts for the season. Again, shooting 46% for a lot of teams is actually not too bad. For the Zags, that is among the season worst. So always kind of like taking these things with a grain of salt. Like 15 turnovers the other night also was amongst the highest that they've had all year long. Actually, I think it was tied for the most that they've had in a single game. So there were definitely some things that on the offensive end that just were out of whack for the Zags. And it's going to take a little bit of time to figure that out, because it wasn't going to be like an overnight thing that, oh yeah, they know exactly how to play without Braden Huff, because, well, they've never had to play without Braden Huff. So this was going to take a little bit of time. And when you look at the Zags schedule over the next couple of weeks, I think that's the thing. It's like, okay, you have Pepperdine on Wednesday, but then the next two, it's San Francisco, St. Mary's. And I don't think San Francisco is really equipped on the defensive end to really deal with the Zags inside. I mean, because I don't know what the answer to Graham Ike is. I don't know if David Fuchs is going to be the answer, or if he's going to be able to at least like. Now, I think he'll be able to match the physicality. I just don't know if he's going to be able to kind of like to slow him down. I think there's differences there between those two concepts, and obviously we'll talk about USF and the Gonzaga matchup when we get to Saturday. But this is a team in Gonzaga that is. We know that they're just gearing up for the tournament. What can they improve upon before they get to March? And right now, how can they play without Braden Huff? Because they might have to play him without him in the NCAA tournament, at least for a game or so. So you have to be able to be ready for that scenario, be prepped for that, and be able to do it against some of the better teams in the league.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I think you mentioned David Fuchs and kind of what he can bring to the table against Graham Ike in the interim. I'd say the big thing that rides on that is the Graham Ike savviness in the post, very good at drawing fouls. I think David Fuchs is a very, very, very capable player and has been one of the very big bright spots for USF on this season, but I'm not sure he has enough in the tank to kind of continue and slow down Ike on a consistent.
Although I will say, you want to talk about people who actually know how to draw fouls. David Fuchs is actually one of the better guys on that front. And of course, we know, like, over the years, Graham Ike has had his own problems with staying out of foul trouble.
That's true. But I think it'd be more than anything, I think the mental game is going to be big between those two guys when they meet on Saturday. But we'll get to that matchup, as you mentioned, on Saturday live. But that's a good enough segue to talk about David Fuchs and the San Francisco Dons escaping eventually at the very end against Washington State. It was not easy. Washington State had an 8-point lead with 6 minutes to go. And the one thing we're going to go back to front, really, because I know Coug fans and Dons fans alike are they're wondering why the sequence played out the way it did. But David Riley calling timeout with 10 seconds to go as Ace Glass is shooting and making the game-tying three-point play after Washington State had given away the lead. And the one thing I want to start with here is I understand, yes, that shot went in, and I fully acknowledge that. But I feel like more than anything, you can't harp on what the result actually was, but more in terms of what the process was. I think, at least for me, yes, you want to set your offense. Like, the part you should be saying is that, yes, Cougs can set your offense, but what you should be scrutinizing is that the Dons can set their defense, which had gotten a lot better over the course of the last few minutes. So I think if you want to scrutinize a part, I think, yes, the shot went in, and obviously that's a big painful thing, but you're playing everything up to that point as opposed to when the shot, was actually put up and then went in. I think you're playing the result as opposed to the process on that one. And while acknowledging that, it was a big deal considering what happened, you should have more qualms with how the defense was able to be set up. And then the set coming out of it was blown up from the start and totally forced. I think it was Jerome Morton who shot the last three, just totally forced, totally unnecessary, and definitely a big moment of regret for Washington State.
I mean, we've seen Washington State. I mean, it's not even the first time we've seen this scenario. I feel like there is another time at some point this season where we've seen that timeout be called, where someone on Washington State did indeed like a critical shot, but we had a timeout called right as they were taking the shot. So clearly there's at least some level of miscommunication coming from the bench to the players about what they're planning to do. Because, I mean, for the most part, it almost never seems like that's a problem. Like, if the timeout's coming and the players know it's coming, it's like just run up to the bench, call the timeout, and we're off and running to try to figure out what we're going to do after the break. But this has happened a couple times to Washington State, and it feels like it's a simplistic thing that should not happen. That the fact that it has happened a couple different moments is inexcusable.
Yeah, and I think the part I will always go back to, and yes, while acknowledging the timeout is a big deal considering the history that you mentioned, Washington State didn't score a single point in the last 2.5 minutes of the game. USF closes the game on a 9-0 run. Like, the ire should be the defensive intensity and the defensive focus for the bulk of the game. Chris Grillerson mentioned post-game that the Dons didn't play with the requisite defensive intensity for the first 38 minutes or so of the game. I think the same holds for Washington State. For some of the second half, I thought they were doing a solid job, but then by the end it dropped off again. And then once the offense went dry and basically when everything went into disarray, then it all kind of collapsed on itself. And I think losing Barry Wong, that was a big time deal that manifested itself for the course of the game. Guillermo Diaz-Graham had another good game, his second in the same week. I would argue he built off the performance against St. Mary's, continuing to make threes and make himself available from distance. I want to see more of that going forward. So for Washington State, for me, it's like all the circumstances surrounding how you got to the timeout is really where I have more qualms than the actual timeout call itself.
I mean, in Washington State, it's almost like it's unfortunate because this was a team that was starting to play a lot better over the last couple of weeks. We even talked about how like they were starting to kind of find themselves. They were having a little bit of better play. Like it was starting to look more cohesive with this group. And we saw that in the early part of WCC play. And then, of course, we did note that they had done that against the bottom half of the league, that they hadn't yet played St. Mary's, they hadn't played Gonzaga, they didn't play USF. And, of course, here they go, 1, 2, 3. And we have seen them play competitive against St. Mary's, fall short. They were at least hanging around for Gonzaga for maybe 12 minutes before the Zags pulled away from them, actually fairly easily in that one. And then going on the road, which is obviously no easy task. And then the way they lost at USF kind of is the one where it's like the one that actually got away. Because you can look at the game in Moraga, it was like, no, that the better team won that game. The better team finished that game off. Obviously with the Zags in Spokane, back up in Washington, that was at the Palouse. Like that's a completely different deal. But at USF is the one that slipped away. Like these two teams played really tough against each other a year ago. Like this was a split matchup. They each one of them were able to take one of the two matchups, and this one is the one that's probably going to sting the most of the recent last 2 weeks for the Cougs.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on that. And I think especially when it comes to teams that you're looking to punch up, it's not the ones where, man, we had a chance to beat St. Mary's or Gonzaga or the top of the league and it got away from us. It's the ones where you're like, you're on a level playing field compared to an opposing team, kind of like USF, and you couldn't execute it. I always compare it to, and I know this is non-WCC related, but at least in terms of the certain resume that Cal basketball has right now. And the thing I talk about is, no, you didn't just lose the last 8 minutes against Duke. It's the game you gave away at Virginia Tech. That matters a whole lot more. And even if you want to take it further with Santa Clara, it's not the game that you lost at versus St. Louis at the Acra. Sure, that hurts. It's the game that you lost against Loyola Chicago. So it's not the ones where you punch up or punch supposedly up that hurt the most. It's the ones where either the bottom falls out from under you, or if you're on the same level and you don't get to execute at the very end. That's what sticks out, I think, more than most. And I agree with you along that front.
Cougs shot 57% from the field, 47% from three, but not enough with USF shooting 54% from three in that one, 12 for 22. So the Dons really lighting it up from distance. Something we really haven't seen all too much from them this year. So the fact that they're starting to feel a lot better from that 3-point line is good sign for the Dons. They were also 15 of 18 from the free throw line. So this is a team, they're slowly starting to kind of creep back into the conversation. They are sitting in 4th place right now. They're sitting there right behind St. Mary's and Santa Clara, the 2nd place Santa Clara Broncos, as they are solely in that spot as of the moment. But USF has kind of handled the business that they need to take care of to this point. And they are going to be coming up to, you think about their stretch coming up, they're at Gonzaga on Saturday. They get all week long to prep for the Zags before they head up to Spokane. Then they're at Santa Clara, they're Pacific, LMU, at St. Mary's. Like, these next 5 for USF are really big for this team because, yeah, I mean, you look at the St. Mary's game, which they could say like got away from them late in that one at War Memorial. A game against Gonzaga, who knows? Like, this is not a matchup that has really gone in the Dons' favor really at all over the last decade plus. So I don't know how much they're actually and how much those fandom would actually anticipate that they're going to beat the Zags or even keep this one close. But at Santa Clara, we know how these two teams get down. And this is always maybe the one game that's not Gonzaga St. Mary's that you just circle, because these two put on a show. We talked a little bit about how St. Mary's Santa Clara is not really quite that rivalry game. This is that rivalry game. Mm-hmm. These two, they're out for blood. It feels like every time these two get together.
These fan bases hate each other. And I think the coaches have a healthy respect for each other. And I think the players, you can sense that type of energy when it's in the building, both at Levy and at War Memorial. And, I will go pound for pound. I will stand on this. Like, the best non-Gonzaga St. Mary's environment of the whole calendar is Santa Clara at USF specifically, because Santa Clara draws that road crowd. And it's unlike anything you really ever see from the Broncos fandom. So yeah, I will back that. I mean, I'm ready for both of these matchups. I'll be at the Levy Center Wednesday, the 28th, ready to go and see a late one after dark on the Mission campus, and then get ready to run it back the following month over on the Hilltop. So it's going to be exciting. And for USF, like you mentioned, yeah, big thing ahead. And if you're Santa Clara, you can't let the rivalry game consume you from your business more than anything. Assuming you do what you need to do against San Diego. The USF, from the Broncos perspective, that they're going to want to ruin your season. That's everything they want to do and then some. So for you, it's like, okay, yes, use the emotion, but use it for good.
Dons are trying to climb back up the ladder. Like, I mean, again, they're the team that's been right there, kind of been the third most consistent team over the last 10 years or whatnot. And Santa Clara is starting to wiggle their way into taking that spot into the upper tier of the WCC. So these two, there's going to be no love lost between these two teams when they match up next week. But of course, we'll get to next week then. But tough stretch for the Dons. The next 5 are right now where they are in the standings. It could go very south very quickly with Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and Santa Clara all within these next 5. Pacific and LMU are also not going to be any pushovers in those matchups either. And both of those, luckily for USF, they're on the hilltop, so I think that'll at least benefit them a little bit on that front. But I think USF is they've done what they've needed to do. They're starting to play better. And they need to be able to play better as they get prepped for the Zags on Saturday. Now, we have a slate of games coming up on Wednesday. Another one of those odd weeks in WCC play. So that is what we're looking at. It'll be coming up on the 21st. Pepperdine at Gonzaga, Washington State at San Diego, LMU at Seattle U, Oregon State at St. Mary's. I mean, there's not really like the quote unquote marquee game. There's not one that kind of like jumps out at me on this, but at least of this slate, what's the one that's going to be the one to pay attention to a little bit more?
I know the one that you were discussing before we started recording here, so I'll pick a different one. I'll go Oregon State, St. Mary's, and I think more than anything, just the pure response level from both teams. I mean, Oregon State, they've had some brutal times recently, and that's kind of putting it lightly. You lose at home to Pacific, and Pacific wins kind of going away in the second half. You think of the loss on the road at Portland recently for the Beavs, and there's just not a whole lot of good happening with the program right now. Yes, you did beat LMU in the interim, and Seattle U for that matter, but Oregon State's been one of the biggest roller coasters in this conference on a night in, night out basis. What version of the Beavs shows up in Moraga? And if you're St. Mary's, I mean, you have to sharpen your focus and get right back to business. The NCAA tournament resume waits for nobody. You got to take care of business against Oregon State.
No, without a doubt, it is going to be interesting to see just what does that bounce back game look like. And of course, the Oregon State road woes, I think, are probably going to rear their ugly head once again against the St. Mary's team. It's probably going to be a lot more focused going into this one. So it'll be, I mean, those are two key things to watch, but I think this is going to end up being pretty one-sided fairly quickly in that one. But the other game, and you mentioned it, was, I mean, it's LMU Seattle U, and it's probably for all the wrong reasons, because this matchup is two teams who are fighting for their lives really at this point, because both of these teams have kind of fallen flat, a lot more flat than we thought they would at this point. Seattle U is now sitting at 2-5 in conference play. LMU is sitting at 2-6. And LMU is 1-6 in their last 7 games. They dropped the game at home to Portland, back end of Portland's SoCal road trip. It feels like it happens every year with LMU. It's like there's that confidence, there's that, they have the talent, they look like they're heading in the right direction, they have a couple of solid wins, and then it just all seems to start to, like, nothing is connecting at the same time. Either the defense isn't there or the offense isn't there. They start turning the ball over a little bit too much. It seems like one thing or another just seems to catch LMU on a given night. And again, like, it's hard to look at that team and not think like this is just like we're looking at another disappointing year for LMU. And with Seattle U, I mean, it feels like we're trying to figure out who they were, because coming in, we felt a lot better about Seattle U coming into league play. Thinking about some of the wins that they had in the non-con, like they came in, it's like, they're playing pretty well. Been pretty good defensively. They're doing all these things well. The backcourt looks good. They've gotten the conference play, and one of those big Achilles heels has been exposed over and over and over again, and that is the Redhawks on the glass.
Yeah, I think at least I'll start with the LMU side, and something's gonna have to give eventually. Either you can't keep running, it's not one thing, it's another. And I equate it to Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills. He arguably got canned for the playoff loss that was least amount of his fault over the course of the years. And for LMU, you're running out of time to justify why things have not graduated into the next tier. And at some point, you're either ultimately going to rise to the occasion, or you're going to get left at the altar one more time. And at least for me, I'm looking at LMU. It's like, okay, man, like who are you going to be? You're gonna have to show me a little bit of something now. It's something that you haven't shown over the last couple of years and change. So that's for me, LMU's in, show me what your territory is situation right now more than anything. And for Seattle U, I think, they maybe, I guess in a certain world, we maybe overvalued their hand walking into WCC play. I think we've been looking at it from the premise of we're waiting for them to figure out, but it could be the potential that they overachieved during their non-conference in certain respects and then have kind of been met relative to the mean in conference play. But I think that's something I'm going to wait to see to make an ultimate conclusion on. This is just in terms of presenting the argument, so more or less. And at least for me going forward, I do want to see how they kind of at least try to make their way out of that mid-pack scuffle, because everybody's involved in it. And Seattle U, you have to focus on going 1-0 every game and try and get your way out of it and get maybe into the 5 or 6 seed for the tournament.
Because there's still a lot of mixing up to be done. I mean, you look at anywhere between 4 and 10, and they're really just all separated by 2.5 games. So it's not like anyone has really run away with anything in the middle of the pack. There's still an opportunity to get one of those buys, to be able to make sure you're not playing on day 1 in Las Vegas. You're not playing on it's still Thursday, right? That we're starting in Vegas.
Yeah, they're doing a 9, 12, 10, 11 on day 1. And then you get into 7, 8, and then 5, 6, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Yeah, trying to stay out of that 8 or 9 through 12 window is at least step 1 for a lot of these teams, and it could happen quickly. Getting out of that window and making sure that you at least have an extra day in Vegas without having to deal with that. Because right now, looking at that window, it's Seattle U, San Diego, LMU, Pepperdine. And before the year, I don't think we would have said that 2 of those teams would have been in that mix. That San Diego and Pepperdine, yeah, probably. But the other 2, yeah, we did not have them that low. We might have to go back soon to look at where we had everybody.
Well,
I have not looked at that in a while.
Well, I know one thing. I had LMU 10, and I had some ire thrown my way from that. And yet, no, I'm not going to victory lap because we are in mid-January. But just in general, for the record, I did have LMU at 10, and unfortunately, the trends are not going in the direction they want it to be.
Yeah, so that is going to be I think it's going to be an interesting matchup again for all the wrong reasons. It's seeing who can try to get right in this game. Who's going to do enough to be able to get a win in this one? LMU desperately needs a win. They need to get one on the road. And Seattle U has given, I think, ample opportunity for a lot of teams to be able to get those wins. So if you can take advantage of them on the glass, if you can shoot it well, because that's something that LMU has not done as of yet. They shot, I was just looking at it, 36 and 31% in the 2 games last week. So they've got to be a lot better than that. They're going to beat Seattle on the road on Wednesday. So those 2, that's the game I'm looking at. Talk about Washington State, Oregon State and St. Mary's also as being one of those to watch. So it's a little bit of a light Wednesday in the WCC. We're going to have a much bigger Saturday in the WCC because that's when we will get San Francisco and Gonzaga. We also do have Seattle U and Pacific. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to see. And I don't want to say you mentioned it of don't want to look too far into the future of that Santa Clara at San Diego game just feels like a trap.
Well, you know what? We'll wait to see how that goes. I think more than anything, I've learned to not make predictions before they hatch right now. So we'll.
I was talking with another buddy of mine who is a Santa Clara fan. He was like, "Let me see who's coming up next," and he stared at San Diego. He's like, "Trap."
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I won't lie that I had another buddy text me saying, "Man, that impending loss to San Diego is going to hurt." So we'll wait and see how it goes. No, I am not predicting that for the record, but again, with Santa Clara, they've been in this position before. Wait and see is the ultimate thing to do.
All right. We will wait and see about San Diego, and we will wait and see about everything that's going to be happening on Wednesday as well to see what is going to be happening in the WCC, where everyone's going to be going as we get into Saturday. Again, we will be doing the unofficial WCC live on Saturday, 9:30 a.m. here on YouTube and Twitch and Instagram. So make sure you catch us there for the live version of the podcast on Saturday morning. And that will wrap it up. Thanks for watching, everybody. And be sure to, if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening. Follow on social media at unofficial WCC Pod. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.